Thank you, Madam Chair. The construction of stadium have not been completed, and policies and firefighters are striking for their payment, and Zika fever is spreading all over the society. This is the status quo of Rio de Janeiro, and we believe there are these kind of significant risks if developing countries host international sporting events. That is why we are extremely proud to propose this motion. I'm going to tell you two things in my speech. Firstly, I'm going to explain about condition of developing countries, and secondly, as a consequence of that, what kind of harm occur for players. Before that, let me set up our model. Firstly, this house means international sporting organization, such as FIFA and such as IOC. And secondly, we prohibit all developing countries from hosting and bidding international sporting events. And thirdly, we objectively decide whether or not countries are developing countries through using the data published by IMF. For example, we are more than happy to cancel Rio Olympic. We are more than happy to cancel such as Qatar World Cup, etc., etc. That is model we stand for. Next, let me move on to my argument. Firstly, the condition of developing country. I'm going to explain about three things. Firstly, about environment. There are quite bad environment in developing countries. I have two reasons why. Firstly, in developing countries, there are air pollution problem by rapid development. There are many factories in only one city, for example, in only one city, such as, for example, Beijing and these kind of mega city. In this kind of city, for example, PM 2.5 is quite problematic in the status quo. And developing countries likely to prioritize economic development over environmental problem in the status quo. That is why we think, especially in developing countries, these kind of air pollution problem occur in the status quo. And secondly, because in developing countries, because of low public sanitation, the epidemic is likely spreading in the status quo. For example, especially in Rio de Janeiro, for example, Zika fever is spreading in the status quo. By this kind of bad environment, in the state, by this kind of low public sanitation, this kind of epidemic is quite spreading, especially in developing countries. That is why we think environment of developing countries is quite bad. And secondly, I'm going to explain about safety in developing countries. They are quite high crime rate in compared with developed country in the status quo. I have two reasons why. Firstly, difference between rich and poor is quite large, especially in developing countries. And why is that? In developing countries, there are less welfare for the poor people. That is why, because of that, like many stealing occur, especially in developing countries, compared with a developed country. And moreover, secondly, because in the status quo, like the public officers, such as police and doctors, are striking in Rio de Janeiro, because the government of Brazil cannot pay salary by the government's less budget. That is why the safety of developing countries is quite unstable in the status quo. That is a condition about the safety in developing country. And thirdly, about the facility of developing country. And the stadium and the training area and the infrastructure cannot be prepared for player and for audience. I have two reasons why. Firstly, simply the developing countries don't have enough budget to make the facility, even if they have a plan, because these unexpected things happen, before hosting international sporting events, such as, for example, economic crisis and those kind of things. That is, even if they have a plan, that these kind of developing countries likely to fail to make stadium and training area and the infrastructure. Moreover, secondly, especially developing countries likely to fail to prepare facility. Because in the case of developed countries already have many stadium and many training area in the past. That is why even if this kind of country fail to make new stadium, that this kind of developed country already can use alternative way to host the international sporting events. However, compared with the developing countries cannot make this kind of if they can't make this facility, they don't have an alternative to prepare those kind of circumstances. That is why also the facility is bad in developing country. And secondly, I will tell you, as a consequence of that, what kind of harm occur for players. I have two things. First, I'm going to explain two things. Firstly, like some players decide not to participate in international sporting events by these kind of conditions. For example, like number one golf player, for example, Jason Day, decide not to participate by risk of Rio de Janeiro, by risk of Zika fever in the status quo. And more than that, for example, in Beijing Olympic, like Ethiopians, like marathon player, don't decide not to participate by air pollution problem, That is why in reality, like some players decide not to participate because of this kind of bad condition of the developing countries. And more than the secondary, like even if they participate these kind of Olympic, they cannot play with best condition in developing countries. Because I have two reasons why. Firstly, as I said, by environment and by safety, they cannot focus on this kind of practice, and they cannot focus on this kind of competition itself. For example, like some players may become disease such as Zika fever in Rio de Janeiro, and more than that, because of the air pollution, they cannot play with best effort. And players also, like in developing countries, players also become like target of crime because like they have lots of money. So they have lots of money. In reality, like in Rio de Janeiro, the athletes become the target of the crime in the status quo. That is why the players cannot play with best condition. More than the secondary, like some sports cannot be held because bad condition. For example, in the case of seeding, in Rio de Janeiro, because water is polluted, this kind of seeding cannot be held in reality. That is a problem for player. Why it's so important? Firstly, they prepare for international sporting events using, for example, 4 years. They make a lot of the effort every day. That is why we think we cannot prepare, so we cannot make best condition for a player. It's quite unjust. Moreover, secondly, the Olympic is a place to decide like number one player. If some player decide not to participate, we can't achieve this kind of purpose in the international sporting events. That is why we think we have to support this motion. Thank you.
Prime Minister. Next, I'd like to call upon Leader of Opposition, Mina Hamadu from Opposition bench. Here.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today's Prime Minister gave us many concerns, for example, like environmental issues, medical issues, security issues, and many other things. For example, the players cannot go to participate, or some sports cannot be held in that country because of pollution or something like that. However, today's opposition side have a counter model, like an impeccable counter model, to counter all of those concerns. And then I'm going to give you, as the leader of opposition, all of the benefits that these sporting events can bring to these developing nations. So first of all, our model is that the organization which is responsible for holding a tournament will have a set of criteria to determine whether or not that candidate nation is capable of hosting that event, right? So, for example, they already check environmental problems like situations, or security problems, or do they have enough accommodation for all the athletes, or do they have public support for that event in that nation, or marketing strategy or financial capability of that nation to host that event. These are the things that are already being checked. However, we are going to pay particular attention to the bid. So, for example, is that country capable of hosting such an event? How much of a budget do they have? And we are going to have an outside committee to prevent corruption, to check each and every item on that budget. And also, we're going to prevent deficit. So according to that country's GDP, we're going to determine whether or not that budget is realistic. And also, the quality of competition between the bids will be compared, because to prevent excessive competition or unrealistic cutting of expenses. And also, about the environmental problems, like consciousness on air pollution was raised because of the decision to hold the Beijing Olympics in 2008 in Beijing. So that is not a reason to prohibit these countries from hosting that event. And for security reasons, we do concede that security officers are not being paid enough in Rio de Janeiro. However, we can preemptively prevent these kind of situations by that model that we have raised, because these IOC or FIFA can check beforehand whether or not the country have the capability to pay those officers enough, or do they have enough money to adjust for just in case. And also, even in case they really do hold the Olympics, that is a problem of national prestige, right? So these countries will do everything they can. For example, even they can bring out the military to help with the security issues. So that is why those terrorism attacks or something like that rarely occurs on these occasions. And also about the medical issues, we can provide everything we can, like in medicine, from developing nations, for example, by IOC's budget or something. And the kind of diseases that these medicine still cannot heal are the ones that developed nations still cannot cope with. So that's not a unique problem to the developing nations. So all of the harms that they raised of developing nations are actually not unique to developing nations. So with that being said, let me move on to the economical benefits. First of all, when the decision is made to hold that event in that particular nation, what happens? This is 7 or 10 years before that actual tournament is going to be held. So first of all, at an instant, an infrastructure is going to be equipped in that nation. For example, not only the stadium, but also the material to transport that material, the railway or the highways will be newly built, and also there will be a high demand for the labor force to do these construction work, right? So that will be a boom in the demand for construction, transportation, and raw material, and the labor force. And also, radical increase in foreign interest as an object of hopeful investment in that nation. What do I mean by this? The investors will think, oh, the land price in this nation is going to rise, so that is why I'm going to invest beforehand to buy that building or buy that piece of land in that nation. That's why the land price will rise more and more, and then the local landowners can benefit, and then the benefit will trickle down to all of the other local people, right? So that's why it's also going to benefit the local people, local businesses, and there will be owners can profit. And also the second level, during that tournament, right, huge numbers of visitors will come. The first group, the athletes, they come beforehand, for example, 2 weeks before the actual tournament to go sightseeing, right? And then the media will follow them around and report everything they eat, they see, or where they lodge, right? So they have a set of fans who follow them everywhere they go. That's why these local business owners can benefit from this sudden boom in demand for their local businesses, and also the spectators. For example, in the Olympics of Los Angeles in 1984, there were 7 million people who came to LA during that tournament, right? So imagine each and every one of them, they need accommodation, they need food, and they need entertainment during their stay in Los Angeles. So that is going to be a huge demand also. And also something unique to Olympics and FIFA and other sports events is that some people are going to compete for the right to televise these kind of events on television, right? So that, and also the sponsors will come to the sports teams or the local stadiums. So that's why these profits also go to the construction workers who built these stadiums or trainers of that sporting team. That's why their income will trickle down to the locals who otherwise would forever be trapped in their poverty, which the government side is willing to keep them in forever, right? And also, let me talk about what happens after the Olympics or the sporting event happens, right? So the infrastructure built, for example, the Shinkansen from the Tokyo Olympics or the highway will still be there, right? So the local people, the domestic business industries can still use them, for example, to prevent traffic jam or to get more transportation, or the human movement inside the country will be more and more stimulated and promote the rise of domestic industry. And this effect lasts for not only 10 years, but 30 or 50 or more longer years after this event is being held, right? So those are the economical benefits. Yes.
Okay, don't you think these profits largely dominated by the rich people, like for example, executive of construction industry, and rarely trickle down to the low-wage employees?
Okay, so about the basics of economy, if these rich people, executives of construction companies, benefit, then they have a large budget for the next year, then they're going to hire more employees who are going to do the simple work inside the company. So the numbers of employees will rise. So that's why the benefit will trickle down, especially when we're talking about developing nations, to those citizens on the ground, right? And also what will happen as a result? The quality of life of that people in that nation will increase because there will be more work, the more hiring, and more income, right? And also the infrastructure is going to improve. That's why there will be less traffic jam, or like the bad facility will be gotten rid of and replaced with new facility. That's why there will be less pollution, and environmental problems they raise will even be alleviated under our paradigm. And also the benefits which otherwise will take 50 or 100 years for that country to achieve will be achieved with a push of unification of the country's political and economical power in that 10 or 20 years, and also in addition to a starting push from the investment from the overseas, right? Not only does it benefit ordinary people's lives, it also has a rise in basic quality of life. It also solves security issues. For example, like the dissatisfaction inside a country will be solved. So that's why these countries will be more stable, and that's going to help that country develop in the future 20 or 30 years. So that's why, looking from all aspects, it's better to let these countries hold international sporting events. Thank you.
For your remarks, next I'd like to call upon Member of Government of Mr. Hagai from Kyoto University from the government side. Here.
When IOC finally decided to hold the Rio Olympics, the Brazilian economy was particularly booming and particularly good. But suddenly, as a result of price decreasing of resources, the Brazil are suffering from massive depression. These things are unexpected by anybody in the IOC. That's why we think even though they try to check this kind of feasibility, we think this is particularly meaningless, especially in the context of developing country. That's why we propose. We're going to talk about three things in my speech. Firstly, why check and balance is insufficient in the context of the European country. And secondly, why this is rather counterproductive in terms of economic benefit. And thirdly, in terms of comparison. Firstly, in terms of check and balance. As I said, the economy of developing country is very, very fluctuated and easily influenced by boom and bust cycle of world economy. As I said in my introduction, the Brazilian economy is good, and like for example, they are called as BRICS, and their economy is particularly good, and nobody doubt on this kind of success of Brazilian Olympics. That's why I say this is unexpected, even though professional of economists try to analyze. Secondly, the bid process is not always to have the multiple auction in the first places. Let's take the example of 1988 Olympics. The only candidates are Seoul and Nagoya, and the Seoul is a developing country in this age, but because Japan have already hold the Sapporo and Tokyo Olympics, that's why the IOC have to choose the Seoul. That's why we say we do not have the multiple and abundant options that we can consider. But actually, these kind of the other criteria, other factors are influenced to the deciding process. That's why I say their characterization is not true. Thirdly, in terms of the member of organizing committee, like for example IOC, are largely politically influenced by the bureaucrats and the politicians of developing country. We think that in the worst cases, they get bribe from these kind of country or the bureaucrats. In this particular context, even though they try to set up the criteria or standard to check the environmental condition, these kind of criteria are more likely to be mitigated by this kind of bribe or political influences. That's why we think as long as we set up the criteria of objective standard of IMF list or published list, we think our criteria is more beneficial in the first places. So let's talk about the second issue about economical benefit. Firstly, we think in terms of economic benefit, the hosting country are more likely the rising developing country and not the least developing country in the first places, such as China or Brazil or Qatar. Therefore, the influence of sporting events is not that large as they characterize in the first places. Secondly, that even if in the short term this is profitable for the developing country, the facility in and of itself is not profitable in the long run. Like for example, Beijing, the bird nest stadium cost too much in terms of sustainable fee. That's why this kind of red ink of this kind of Beijing Olympic is particularly serious in the long run. That's why I say in the long term, that even if you consider short-term benefit, in the long term, this is not profitable in the first places. Thirdly, on the comparative, if government create the public infrastructure or educational institution by using the money of stadium, by using the money of hosting Olympics, in this particular context, this is more likely to be beneficial for the citizen in the long run, because maybe such kind of very unique design special stadium is very, very costly for the sustainable maintenance fee. But in the case of the university, in the case of public transportation, we think in this particular context that these things these things is more beneficial in the long run. That's why we say this is more beneficial. So fourthly, we say even if this kind of Olympic is beneficial for the short term, we think that these people who get the money, these people who get the, mainly who get the money is people who already have the power, people who already have the connection with the government, people who already have the connection with the bureaucrats. That's why we think this kind of trickle down is not happen, and rather that this kind of money is more mainly dominated by the executive of construction industry, executive of public transportation industry. We think this is much more significant problem, because as they even though they mentioned that this is trickle down because that this kind of money can be used, but as actually that this kind of trickle down is denied by some economists. This trickle down because they go to mainly the they go to the tax that they send the money to the tax haven, they use the money for their own private tax, the evasion happens. We think that's why trickle down rarely happens. And more than that, even if the labor get the jobs and labor in the short term, at the same time the Beijing or much more citizens forcibly move from the city and deprive their job. Let's take the example of Beijing Olympic again, because in order to construct a stadium, in order to construct public transportation, in this particular context, the Beijing government, the Chinese Communist government, forcibly require citizens to move from the Beijing and deprive their job, and they reject that kind of temporary worker from the Beijing. We think as a result of that these much more people are suffering from the poverty, much more people are dying because of this kind of policy. We think that's why on the comparative level, we think the economic benefit of Olympic is not that important compared with our benefit in the first places. Okay, then finally moving on to the comparison, but before that,
okay. So Tokyo, we have a lot of bribes being reported by the, for example, like Guardians and all the like international news agencies. Don't you think that's not mutually exclusive on your side? That still that bribing and like corruption actually happens?
Okay, we concede some problem is not unique to the developing country, but the main cause of problem, as my partner clearly mentioned, that lots of uniqueness, like for example rapid development, like for example such kind of crime rate is unique in the first places. That's why I say that this kind of process itself, the combining this kind of our argumentation and this kind of uniqueness, we think our policy is beneficial compared to their policy. So finally, in terms of comparison, even if we concede other benefit, as long as it risks to sacrifice the effort of athlete, we should prioritize athlete in the first places, as my partner clearly characterized. Because we think the main focus of international sporting events, like for example Olympic, is not such kind of economical development, like not such kind of symbolic showing the power of the Chinese government. Rather, the main focus should be the athlete on their own, because the only person who make the maximum effort to achieve their goal is the athlete. That's why I say this is particularly that's why we think the main focus should be on the athlete. And secondly, compared with the economic benefit, which can be alternated by other economic policy, like for example creating other infrastructure, this kind of quality of this kind of athlete is not alternated in the first places, because they are devoted 4 years practice only for exclusive for the Olympics. But these kind of things are disturbed by this kind of policy or bad condition of a developing country. We think compared with that, we should prioritize athlete. We shouldn't prioritize this kind of economy. That's why we propose.
Next, I'd like to call upon member of opposition, Ryota Kosuge from Osaka University, from the opposition bench. Here.
I'm going to take a look at this debate from three perspectives. Number one, I'm going to take a look at the environment and security concerns that the first speaker of the affirmative basically talked to you. Second thing, I would like to take a look at the economical benefit, which my partner clearly talked to you. And I'm going to give you a specific comparative analysis on why, like on the R side, we are able to establish better economic prosperity on the R side. And we are going to give you a comparative on which side is more realistic. From that perspective, we believe that the economic prosperity can be better achieved on the R side. Thirdly, I'm going to elaborate the issue of right to see sports for the developed people in developing countries. Because this sport necessarily moves people in order to struggle and incentivize people to struggle and to go further and go break down all of the barriers which prevents people from being able to establish and improve themselves. And that is the very unique point of this international sporting event, which I'm going to elaborate in my third argument. So let's take a look at directly. Second, let's take a look at first issue about environment and security. We told you on our side that our model that we are able to exclude all of the dangers and incapabilities of holding international sporting events, which means all of the concerns that these guys are talking about are incapability, not inherent to developing countries. Developing countries we are talking about, Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia, who have capability of hosting an international sporting event. What they have to prove on their side is why developing nations itself, the label imposed by the developed country, a legitimate reason for these people to be able to prohibit for these privileges. But second of all, what we would like to tell you coming from our side is we agree that some places of inside, for example, India or some places like Congo are maybe dirty and filthy on your side of on both sides. So the question therefore, what they defend on their side is that sports athlete from the first world. What we are defending on our side is that people living there, people living in favela in Brazil, and people living in slums in India, those people still have to subject to the very reality that they have to constantly feel fear and fear of death, ladies and gentlemen. So on the our side, why we are able to decrease the security, decrease or increases the security concern on the our side. Because we believe that because this is the national pride, it depends on the national pride, therefore the country, for example, Brazilian government have massive incentive to improve the very situation of favela, for example, in order to keep away all of the dangers that might be inflicted upon people, and therefore that massively reduces the crime rate of the favela in Brazil when Rio de Janeiro, World Cup, for example. So therefore, we are defending that the people living there directly feeling this threat to the nation. On their side, they are defending that the people from third world, people from first world, who have a privilege to be able to compete in athletes. So comparative here. Under their side, they are defending already privileged individuals who have capability of playing the sports. On our side, we are defending the security and environment for these people who don't have an escaping avenue inside the developing country. That's why, on the comparative, we agree that security is a huge concern, but on our side, we are defending more vulnerable coming from our side, and that is the comparative in this debate. Second issue, economy. No, thank you. What we heard from these guys is that economy is not going to be better off under their side. So let's give you a realistic comparative here. Only once in the Summer Olympic was fall into debt. Therefore, rest of the Olympics actually have a more benefit than cost that these guys would like to talk to you. So the comparative here is this. On our side, we are more realistic coming from our side because the Olympic actually profitable because of the mechanism that we provided on our side. But let's take a look at the logic coming from their side. What we heard from their side is that first level corruption. I've already told you that corruption is not mutually exclusive on both sides. Thus cannot be a reason to deny the privilege of the developing countries. For example, Corporation D actually involved in the process of bid, so in the selection process in the Tokyo Olympic, right? Therefore, which means that even in Japan, we have a problem of corruption, and therefore we believe that it's not mutually exclusive. It is selfish to impose only a label of corruption that is developing countries actually happening, because we don't think that it's not mutually exclusive harm under their side. Second thing we heard from the other side is that the economic fluctuation because of the depression. We told you, for example, Brexit or any other sorts of Lehman shocks, for example, are not inherent to developing nations, but actually developed country suffers from the fluctuation of the economy. No one can predict, as these guys told you. Therefore, there is not a responsibility of the developing countries that they are going to undergo the economic depression question. That is not mutually exclusive. Third thing we heard from the other side is that university be better off than like infrastructure we establish. We tell you that university could be better be established on our side, because like the characterization on their side, the people have incentive to like people in a high-ranking official have incentive to dominate the benefit of this country, which means that if on our side more supervision from the international community, from the international community necessarily incentivizes the people who are in the ruling party or administration of that country. Therefore, on our side, we are able to incentivize politicians to be able to invest the future benefit, like establishing university on our side, and that is the comparative in this debate. Yes, sir.
Okay, why IOC, who is the institution of promoting sportsmanship, should promote the economy of developing country?
Because we believe at the same, like sporting event at the same time is the economic measure to be able to escalate themselves in the socio-economic ladder, which means that this is the one form of economic policy which international community doesn't have a right to intervene and interfere that solvency, and that is the problem. So but thirdly, even if we were to assume that the Olympic and IOC is the organization to promote sportsmanship, why we believe that right to see sports of the developing country is more important than anything else that these guys would like to bring to you. Because we tell you that seeing the sport directly inside the stadium necessarily moves you and incentivize you to have a future, hope for the future. Because, for example, because they are going to feel that a sportsmanship, they are going to feel that the blood and sweat and tears that these guys or these sporting athletes have been undergoing, right? Because, for example, Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, and those people have already undergone the very struggles, very troubles, but these guys are still able to overcome that wars, and therefore they are able to compete in an international sporting event. When, for example, children are able to see and touch their superheroes, we believe that incentivizes people and help people to have a hope for the future. That's why we believe that's an important right. So let's give you a comparative here. On their side, they are defending the sport athletes who already have a privilege. On our side, we are defending the people who are not having anything but still have a hope and are going to have a hope for the future under our side. That's why we believe the international Olympic or international sporting event should not exclude developing nations.
Next, I'd like to call upon Leader for Pushimina Hamada again to construct your reply speech for 4 minutes. Here.
っかりあれば3年。
Today's government side let the mere possibility of failure of the international sporting event be the reason to exclude all the developing nations from hosting these international sporting events and force them to miss out on all the tangible and concrete benefits, the economical benefits, the environmental benefits, the security and military and other political benefits that we have raised from our side, just because they are called like the so-called developing nations, right? So all of the benefits that which is going to benefit all the class of people in that nation and sustainable development of their domestic industries, which without the push of international attention and economical opportunity given by these international sporting events, without the push of these things, they'll never even take the primary step toward achieving these by these developing nations, right? So all of the sporadic rebuttals they gave are not enough to overturn our realistic analysis of economical benefit, which will be brought to these developing countries, right? So for example, they said like in the long term, these gyms are not profitable enough, or they said that in China, a lot of people were removed from their original residences just for that event. However, those are just case study on individual cases, and they failed to show the inherent nature of all developing nations, which are fit to exclude, which can be used as a criteria to exclude all of those nations from hosting international sporting events, right? So the comparative that my partner just gave was really efficient in beneficial for us winning this debate, because what they are protecting, let me say again, are the small number of athletes or like the privileged people, privileged sports fans from the first world countries who want to see a specific sport being hosted in that specific Olympic Games or like FIFA played on TV live, right? However, what we are defending on the other hand is that we are giving people from developing countries not just economical benefits, but we're also giving them hope, right? Hope that their country is moving towards development finally, and also hope that the government is finally endeavoring to better the basic lives, the quality of lives of their citizens by equipping them with infrastructure, for example, the highways and the other things, and also, for example, equipping them with internet facility and environment, right? And also hope that they finally their lives will be better, and the promises of the decades to come, right? Like the economical development and all of the quality of life development that comes with the economical development. They try to say that these economical benefits will stay in the only the class of privileged people on the top of that developing nations. However, they never show the mechanism. They only relied on some of the economist speech, right? So those trickle-down effects will actually happen when we consider these developing nations, especially, right? Because these people, even after they get those economical benefits, they have to spend the money to create more money in the future. That's why inside that developing nation, there will be more hiring, no more jobs created, which are going to give jobs to the people who were previously unemployed or who were previously only doing simple jobs, for example, right? So this is the purpose and responsibility and the spirit of international sporting events, right? So sports is all about equality of all sportsmen, regardless of their, for example, social economical class, right? So when the government side just point of information asked my partner about why they have the responsibility to keep in mind those developing nations' economical development in the future, they are kind of legitimizing the exclusion of those privileged countries, dominating the privileges and the benefits of those international sporting events only to themselves, and never giving that benefit to the nations who are coming up with them as a developing nation. So lastly, I have to, no, there's nothing more. Okay, so that's why I probably oppose. Thank you.
Thanks for your remark. Finally, I'd like to call upon Prime Minister to conclude this debate within 4 minutes. Here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From three perspectives, I conclude this debate. Firstly, whether or not their model can prevent harm coming from our side. And secondly, in terms of the economy, which is better for developing country. And thirdly, as international sporting organizations such as IOC and FIFA, how they should host the country. I explain one by one. Before that, I have independent liberators, the DLO. The DLO said if people can watch these kind of international sporting events in developing countries, that they can get they can get many benefits. However, we think the only rich person have a capacity to watch the game even in developing countries, because this kind of ticket is quite high price. Many audience from first world buy these kind of ticket in the status quo. That is why even the developing country host international sporting events, these kind of poor people still can't watch these kind of things and still can't these kind of international sporting events. That is, it's not beneficial for these kind of people. Next, I explain a point. Firstly, whether or not their model can prevent harm coming from our side. Their model is check the feasibility of developing countries. Of course, we already do this kind of method in the status quo. However, for example, in reality, for example, Beijing and Rio, why these kind of problems happen, even if we do this kind of method in the status quo? For example, they argue, for example, they check reality of plan, they check, for example, they can use military to stop, to keep safety. Of course, if it's feasible, of course, already we can do that. Already we can solve all problems of the developing countries' Olympic, developing countries' international sporting events. However, in reality, still this kind of problem occur by the we can't expect the future of the country. For example, like there are 7 years before holding international sporting events. Because of that, by fluctuation, we can't expect the future of these kind of circumstances. That is why even though their model can't prevent the harm coming from our side, that still occur this kind of the problem about the environment and the problem about the safety still occur in our paradigm. And secondly, about the economy. Of course, we concede like some economic benefit occur because of the many people come this area. However, as my partner already told you, these kind of harm firstly that can't trickle down towards like poor people at the very beginning. More than the secondary, these kind of benefit is only like short-term benefit. For example, construction company, even though like construction company, they hire many people in order to make stadium. However, after the Olympic, after the international sporting events, for example, there are no enough like demand for like for the construction company. The construction company don't have enough incentive to hire more people. In that kind of circumstance, they suddenly they suddenly lay off a lot of people in developing country. It's also like harmful for those kind of people. Even though like somehow in short term their economic benefit for developing country, we think it's not huge. Moreover, thirdly, as international sporting organization such as IOC and FIFA, that we shouldn't decide by the economic development, because simply like why the IOC why the international sporting organization have a responsibility to care the development of developing country. Of course, the international sporting organization have a responsible to care like the players' condition. They have to prioritize the players' condition over the economic development, because as my partner already told you, this kind of economic development can be alternated. For example, making like theme park in developing country, like making many things in terms of the economy. However, in the case of like players' condition, we can't alternate. If they decide a developing country, that is we think on the comparative level, the international sporting organization should not decide developing country as a host country. Thank you.